Hi, Jen here from Sax Player TV. There are some real bargains to be had on eBay. I've seen students pick up fantastic instruments for a fraction of the shop price. But those bargains come with risk, because if you buy a saxophone that needs significant work, you can quickly find yourself in a situation where the repair bill costs more than the instrument itself. And saxophone repairs are not cheap. In an ideal world, you would always examine and play test a saxophone before handing over your money. My personal advice is always to go and see any instrument you're planning to buy, but I know that isn't always possible. You might be buying from the other end of the country, or purchasing for a child, or working within a tight budget. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the safest way to buy a saxophone on eBay, so you dramatically increase your chances of getting a decent instrument. These tips apply whether you're buying a student or intermediate horn. I'll cover what to check, what to ask, and at the end I'll talk about the brands I personally feel safest recommending at student budget level. Quick disclaimer, these tips are designed to help you minimise risk, but I'm not an eBay expert, and I can't offer any guarantees. What I can offer is experience from buying many instruments on behalf of my students and seeing what goes wrong. The first thing you should always do is ask the seller direct questions. Ask if the saxophone plays from top to bottom. Ask when it was last serviced. Ask if they are aware of any faults. If a sax can genuinely play from the lowest note to the highest without issue, that's a very good sign there are no major leaks. But be careful. Some instruments are sold by parents who bought the sax for their child. They may honestly say, "It's fine," but they haven't played it themselves. That's not necessarily dishonest, but it does mean they may not actually know. You can protect yourself by clearly stating before purchase that if the instrument is not as described and requires significant work, you would expect to return it. One of the benefits of eBay is that if an item is not as described, you can open a dispute and discuss a refund. Make that safety net work in your favour. Next, ask for as many detailed photos as possible. Clear close-up images are essential. Look carefully for dents, especially on the main body, and particularly around the bow, which is the curved section at the bottom of the instrument. Dents in the bow can suggest the sax has been dropped or knocked and may need professional work. That said, it's not completely black and white. Small dings are very common on used saxophones and may have no negative effect at all. Dents on the bell are also fairly common and can usually be removed. Scratches and lacquer wear are mostly cosmetic. They might make the instrument look older, but they do not necessarily affect how it plays. However, a noticeably bent bell or body is something to be cautious about. Ask for close-up photos of the pads. These are the circular leather pads underneath the keys that create the seal. It can be difficult to judge pads from photos alone, and they are often dirty, which does not automatically mean they need replacing. A pad is probably fine if the surface looks smooth, and even, rather than lumpy or warped, the leather looks intact with no tears or cracks. The pad sits flat inside the key cup rather than tilted, and there are no obvious gaps between the pad and the tone hole rim in the photo. Red flags would include wrinkles or ripples in the leather, dark, shiny, hardened spots that suggest water damage, edges curling up, pads sitting off-centre, or uneven deep indent lines. But here's the important limitation, and this builds trust. A photo cannot tell you whether a pad actually seals under pressure. To know that, you need to physically close the key and test it with air or a leak light. So photos reduce risk, but they don't eliminate it. Check the mouthpiece cork on the neck. This is the strip of cork that the mouthpiece slides onto. It should look even, not crumbling or heavily compressed. A worn cork is an easy fix for a repairer, but it's still something to factor into the overall condition and potential cost. Now look at the accessories. If the sax comes with a mouthpiece, ask for a clear photo. The mouthpiece is one of the most important parts of the instrument. It's common for them to look faded or slightly discoloured, and that's fine. What you don't want are chips on the tip, rails or table. Even small chips can seriously affect how it plays. Reeds are not so important because they are regularly replaced anyway. Check the case carefully. It should be sturdy and fit the instrument securely. Look at the zips and stitching in the photos. Make sure the zip fully closes and isn't pulling away. Be very cautious of thin fabric cases with no padding. These are essentially bags with no real protection. I've seen far too many instruments damaged because they were stored or transported in one of these. If you're satisfied and ready to go ahead, ask the seller to package the saxophone securely for shipping. It should be wrapped thoroughly in bubble wrap, placed inside the case, and then supported so it cannot move around inside the case. Any empty spaces should be filled. While you can't control how someone packs an item, you can make it clear that careful packaging is important. That simple request can make a big difference. When the saxophone arrives, inspect it immediately and play test it thoroughly. Don't leave it sitting in the box for a week. If you have a teacher, ask them to give it a proper play test as soon as possible. If there is an issue, you want to deal with it straight away. So here's the overall checklist in simple terms. Make sure returns are accepted. Ask detailed questions. Get as many close-up photos as possible. Check for dents, especially around the bow. Look closely at the pads. Inspect the neck cork. Look for bent rods or screws. Check the mouthpiece and the case. Involve your teacher if you can. Make it clear you will return the instrument if it's not as described. And ask for secure packaging. Now let's talk about brands, because this is where experience really helps. I've bought many saxophones on behalf of my students, and over time I've built up a picture of what I feel is reliable at beginner level. If a brand isn't mentioned here, that doesn't mean it's no good. It simply means I don't have enough personal experience with it to comment confidently. At the very budget end, I've been pleasantly surprised by Arbiter and Artemis. For someone on a very tight budget, these can sometimes be picked up at a low cost and offer decent value. I've also seen Saku saxophones imported by sax.co.uk, and they seem to be solid for the price. Moving slightly higher, but still within budget territory, you'll often find John Packer, Trevor James and Jupiter. I particularly like Jupiter and John Packer instruments. They tend to have good keywork and produce a strong, reliable sound for students. They also have consistently good reviews. Trevor James are also well regarded, though I've personally had more hands-on experience with Jupiter and John Packer. Going higher in price, we enter Yamaha territory. Yamaha saxophones have an outstanding reputation. They hold their value well and are usually easy to sell on. They're consistent, reliable, and generally play very well in tune. That said, I do think some of the better Jupiters stand up surprisingly well when compared to entry-level Yamahas, especially considering the price difference. Other student instruments I've been impressed with include Buffet Crampon, Antiqua, Buffet Yvette, and Conselma Prelude. Again, I'm talking specifically about student-level instruments that are relatively affordable and tend to be reliable and reasonably in tune for the price. So those are my top tips for buying a used saxophone on eBay. Wherever possible, go and see the instrument in person. But if that's not an option, use this guide to minimise the chances of buying a nightmare. If you've had a great experience with a particular student instrument, let me know in the comments. It's always helpful to share real-world experiences. And just to repeat, I'm not an eBay expert. These tips are a guide based on experience and can't guarantee a completely risk-free purchase. But if you follow them carefully, you'll put yourself in a much stronger position. Happy hunting, and I'll see you in the next video.